good evening, and welcome to The Right Side, the show where we talk about today's news, views, trends, and opinions from an admittedly conservative perspective. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and I'd like to welcome you to our 8th season. But this evening, we're also joined by Pete Peterson. He's from Pepperdine University. He's a former Secretary of State candidate and an out-of-the-environment, out-of-the-box conservative, trying to spread conservative values and encourage others to do the same. Pete, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, Chris.
So I alluded a little bit to, you have a political background,
right.
You have a university background.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about the university background.
Yeah.
Include the political, and tell us how you got here and who you are.
Well, I started in the private sector, actually, worked in marketing and sales for the better part of 15 years coming out of undergraduate school, volunteered on a political campaign back in the early 2000s, and it was really that experience that made me think more about getting more involved politically. That made me think more about going back to school. I applied to Pepperdine myself, and back in 2004, 2005, went back to get my own master's degree. That was a life-changing experience for me, in that originally I thought that I might just take my degree and go back to doing what I was doing before. But it was really through those 2 years in Malibu on campus that I learned that where my passions were in politics and policy, and specifically looking at things from a more thoughtful conservative perspective. That set me up in working and leading a think tank on California policy at Pepperdine. And then did that for a number of years, ran for office in 2014 for Secretary of State, really because of the issues I was seeing as part of that think tank, wanting to increase civic engagement and civic participation in the state. Finished second in that race, but came back and was offered the position as Dean of the Graduate Policy School just about 3 years ago, and have been the very grateful Dean of the Graduate Policy School at Pepperdine ever since.
And tell us a little bit about what you do as far as helping to shape policy at Pepperdine, and how to prepare, I don't know if they're all young minds, but at least malleable minds that can kind of absorb that there is a problem and policy needs to be shaped.
Yeah, no, it's really one of the best parts of my job, is that I am seeing students, for the most part, they average between 24 and 26 years old at our graduate school, that have taken that more intentional step after getting their undergraduate degree to say, I want to get more involved in politics and policy. The student body is actually fairly diverse, both left and right, but certainly when you look at our curriculum, when you look at the faculty who teaches with us, if you look at many of the events we host, it's fair to say that we are one of the only center-right graduate schools, certainly in California, if not in the United States, working in the field of public policy. And so the way that we, I wouldn't say shape minds, as much as one of the phrases that we use is we're about teaching people how to think and not what to think. And so many of the students that come to us from undergrad, unfortunately, have been told what to think and not how to think. And so we often see students that come to us, both on the left and right, have not really practiced or honed the skills of critical thinking.
I was going to ask.
And so what we try to do, both through teaching Socratically, engaging in the great ideas, as well as quantitative coursework, is to help students really call into question why they think what they think. And as we look out at a political environment that's so polarized, helping students to understand how the other side thinks. And certainly as we prepare students to go off into politics and policy, to go work in DC and Capitol Hill, or up in Sacramento, or in cities all over the country, we want to prepare them to think critically and to understand how the other side thinks.
So you start them in a remedial critical thought class, and then once they've proven they have the ability, now you move them up into the other coursework?
Yeah, you know, the first semester of the 4 semesters at Pepperdine is our core curriculum. It's named for the great social scientist James Q. Wilson, who helped design our curriculum, who was a well-known conservative social scientist. And one of the things that he really brought to our coursework is the understanding that when you have students engage with the great ideas, the great books, it's a way of both humbling the student, that they understand that they weren't the first person to think these thoughts. But at the same time, it helps them to engage in the foundational ideas that whether you come from the right or the left, really undergirding those philosophies are pretty core assumptions about the way the world works. And that's not to say that we're going to dissuade a progressive student from thinking the way they do, but certainly we're going to cause them to better understand how the right thinks, and we're going to cause the conservative student to take more seriously the great history and political philosophy that undergirds the conservative movement.
How jarring is that to the students who aren't used to thinking that way or seeing the other side, or that actually have grown up on social media where you can anonymously bash the crap out of your opponent without feeling the ramifications, versus being in close proximity where they could actually hit you?
Yeah, you know, Chris, I mean, it's, and you bring up that great multiplier there about social media. That's something that wasn't around when I was going to undergraduate school. And those things about, first, the general environment that we see on our undergraduate campuses, which could be politely called a bubble or an echo chamber. Chances are that the vast majority of our students who go through even top flight undergraduate institutions have not really learned about conservative thought or how the other side thinks. At the same time, what I've seen is how social media can definitely amplify and frankly simplify our political arguments. And so when you have to sit in a 4-hour class of the great books and political philosophy and engage with a faculty member who really knows his or her stuff, you're not going to be able to get away with a tweet, size, little soundbite. You're going to have to engage with these great thinkers and at the same time also engage with your fellow students face to face. And so I think that is an experience that for students who have not gone through it, that first semester is I call it the Pepperdine headache, because you get these students that are really having to think about things in new ways, hear not only new ideas, but to engage with students in a way that a little soundbite is not going to win the argument. You're really going to have to be thoughtful and understand how the other side thinks.
Do you notice clumping, though, and a herd mentality? Because that's another thing about social media. One of the ways that you can silence the other side, and this is what we'll probably get into in a minute about, for example, the undergraduate schools and things. A lot of times, the herd mentality can stifle that other alternative thought process or cause people. I think the last presidential election kind of showed how people might say one thing out in the echo chamber of society, but when they had that opportunity to be private and sneak away into the voting booth and no one was there, no matter what the surveys and the polling said, there were surprises on election day.
There were, but I would argue, Chris, that, to your good point about clumping, that understanding what you saw in the surveys on college campuses, they rang true. And even though President Trump was certainly elected, what we saw on the college campuses, there was a great survey done by Harvard, which I talk about when I speak publicly on these issues. At Harvard, 89% of their faculty voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. 3% of their faculty voted for Trump. Now, that I think was reality to them, but if you got 2 miles outside of Cambridge, you were looking at a completely different political environment. And I think, to your point, what we're seeing is, unfortunately, the environment that you see around clumping on college campuses is beginning to bleed out into the larger society. And so much of the polarization that we see is really, frankly, an inability to understand how the other side thinks. And I think, unfortunately, some of it is being created in our college classrooms.
Well, and this is interesting because we talked about there's a loss of the ability to think critically.
Right.
And there's also this intimidation that I think occurs when you're around people who are smarter than you. And that's often quoted, well, people smarter than me say this and say that or what have you. So you're defaulting to someone else's brain cells for what you believe. And if it trickles, that's dangerous. That's toxic waste out in society.
It is, and I think also, just to go back to the college environment and some of the great survey work that's been done just over the last few years, What you see with conservative students is they are much more prone to silence their own opinions. So even if you're looking at college educated to college educated, that dynamic that you're talking about where somebody says, well, somebody is holding a progressive perspective and, I'm not sure if I want to, they're more educated than I am. Even those that are at the same educational level, they're still going to squelch themselves. And I think that really is one of the very disturbing things that we're seeing on college campuses is when people do not feel free to thoughtfully express themselves, especially conservative students and conservative faculty and academics.
Well, and if it seems that there's no one else that thinks that way, there's no one giving them the permission to misbehave and to speak their mind, then it makes it very easy to drive the appearance of consensus if nobody's opposing.
And that's what we see so much in that first semester at the graduate school, is we see conservative students really for the first time realize that they can express themselves and not be dismissed by a faculty member. But at the same time, you hear progressive students, who we definitely welcome into the program, hear a different perspective for the first time. And if it's moderated in a right way, which I think our faculty do a terrific job of moderating very polarizing and political conversations, you really develop the essential skills of a citizen, which goes back to our days in the playground where we learn how to play well with others. I mean, essentially a citizen should be able to play well with others. And I think if there's anything that marks this moment in our political era is that we're not playing well with others.
Do you give emotion injections to conservatives, though? Because what I've noted is that's the place where they often lose. They try to go completely brainiac, and sometimes they forget that emotion does play a large part in emotional conversations.
That's a great point. So we address that in two ways. One is...
And I wasn't advocating drugging your students. I just want to be clear.
No. And
it is legal in California for...
There are no drugs involved in our curriculum.
Okay.
We address that in two ways. One is when you teach people about the founding era and our founding history and political philosophy, you understand that so much of our political decisions are not simply quantitatively based. They're actually based in foundational principles. And you can say, well, policy A looks better than policy B on an Excel spreadsheet. But when you're talking to the public, that's what makes the difference between policy and public policy. You've got to speak in a language that they can understand and appeal to them. So understanding history and political philosophy is so important for public policy. The second thing is Jonathan Haidt, who's a professor at NYU, a self-described progressive, wrote a great book a couple of years ago called The Righteous Mind, which we actually use in the curriculum. And what Haidt talks about in that book is that there are 5 what he calls moral foundations that underpin every human civilization. And they range everywhere from moral triggers like caring and fairness to things like authority and holding something sacred in a culture. Those are those emotional pieces. Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right to say conservatives very much are about thinking on the authority level and thinking I've got the facts, whereas progressives think much more about those areas of caring and fairness.
Right.
Now, unless conservatives can speak that language, we're going to continue to lose in the broader field of ideas in the public square.
Right.
But we certainly teach in the curriculum that if you're going to be a public leader as opposed to a bureaucrat, you're going to have to speak an emotional language at the same time understanding the quantitative policy ideas.
Thank you. Because it's like, well, if you had a pulse, I might vote for you, but I'm not sure that you do. And you can prove that there's a pulse, but that still doesn't prove I'm going to, So, great. Well, one of the things that you talked about also as we were getting ready for the show is that there is a different experience also, though, from a faculty versus a student perspective.
Right.
And there are different ramifications to their general lives if they misbehave and where they misbehave.
Right.
Talk to me a little bit about what that means.
Right. So if you consider as a conservative faculty member in any college or university, you're having a different experience than a student is, obviously.
Hopefully.
The survey work that's been done in both of those groups reveals a couple different things. One is the survey work that's been done on faculty shows that conservative faculty are very quick to squelch their own opinions. That matches what conservative students do. But unlike them, they won't write for conservative policy journals, even more conservative ones like National Review or the National Affairs Journal, because they fear the ramifications of publishing, tenure review, and being placed on committees. So the professional life of a conservative faculty member is different than what the student experiences in the classroom. At the same time, for the student experience in the classroom, I think what we're seeing with some of these, frankly, I would say unhelpful speakers that are brought to many college campuses. You think about Milo Yiannopoulos and others that are much more confrontational. Really where that's coming from is a position of not being heard or worse, being dismissed for who you are, what you think about. And so the response is always to overcompensate. And so I think what we've seen on college campuses where there have been these, and in the Bay Area, you think about what happened at Cal a couple of years ago with the riots and so on, is you're seeing an overcompensation by conservative students. The work that I do and a lot of the talks that I give to students is to understand that there is a solid conservative academic foundation to any field that you want to pursue, whether it's in history or social science or the environment or in economics, and to appeal more to that academic thoughtful side than into the confrontational side. But it's important to understand the conservative academics, because this is their life, this is their professional life, are doing things, frankly, that are not in the best interest of freedom of thought, because they're squelching their own opinions, but they're doing it because this is their career and they're doing it for, frankly, professional preservation.
Yeah, preservation was exactly the word that was coming to my mind. But have there been any studies done on if there are certain pockets of academia that are more prone to squelch?
Yes.
So, for example, science, politics.
Yeah. So very good question. And what the surveys have shown, and there was a great study done at the beginning of 2018 by the National Association of Scholars, is that when you look at more of the quantitative sciences and natural sciences, if you're thinking about engineering, even environmental sciences, if you're thinking about math and physics, there's almost an equal balance between conservatives and progressives. As you begin to get more into the social sciences and liberal arts, when you're talking about history, even pre-law, if you're getting into sociology, certainly political science, then you're looking at dramatic differences between the number of progressives and conservatives.
And would those lean progressive by chance?
They absolutely do. And again, I think one of the points that's fair to raise is I wouldn't care if there were if we found out that 90% of our physicists were progressive. Because physics is a study that, you've
no
got
liberal math.
That's right. That's right. Math is math. Physics is physics.
Well, unless it's the new math.
That's right.
And then just as long as you feel good about the answer, that's all that really matters.
However you got there. But when you get into some of these more, frankly, liberal arts, social science type courses,
places where feelings are involved?
Feelings are involved. Ways of thinking about America are involved and America's role in the world. When you start looking at our history and social sciences, political sciences, that's when, and certainly I see it when I speak to students as far as what they're going through in the classroom, that's where I think we need to be much more concerned about the political polarization of those disciplines.
But as you talk about this, and you talk about the self-squelching and those kinds of things, it makes perfect sense why we would have disproportionate numbers of people in those places.
Yeah.
Because a conservative mind tends to want to conserve and preserve their own safety. Those are the people they love. They want to be kind of insulated from the attacks, what have you. But on the other side, much more emotionally driven, want to make sure that everyone believes what they believe. It makes sense why you would have the disproportionate population.
And then that extends on into going for your PhD. So one of the questions I ask for student groups when I'm speaking to student organizations, certainly conservative ones, I ask them the question, how many of you have changed your major from a political science, politically based social science major to something that's non-political, business, math, physics, natural sciences?
Because it doesn't hurt so much.
That's right. And it's always a third of the hands go up. Now, to me, that should disturb every progressive, conservative citizen of the United States, that we have students that could be great political scientists, they could be great historians, they could be great social scientists, but they get to that certain point at some point in their undergraduate career when they say, why would I want to put myself through a master's degree and 5 more years of PhD study when I'm going through this here in undergraduate school? And so what you hear sometimes progressives say, well, why do we have so many progressives in the liberal arts? Well, because progressives are smarter. You actually hear that. Without allowing the environment that these conservative students are going through, why would they ever want to sign on for another 6, 8, 10 years of academic study? And so that's the thing I think we all need to be very concerned about is, again, I'm not about conservatives taking over academia, but I want to give those kids that want to be PhD historians and political scientists, I want to give them the chance to do that and not have to go through some of the experiences that they are in even great schools around the country.
But couldn't we change all of this by an affirmative action program within universities or within the marketplace as a whole, so that we have to have a certain number of conservative CEOs in a general region? Is that possible? I mean, what give us
Chris,
hope.
It actually has been raised, right? And I actually don't support affirmative action for
Nor
this.
do I.
But I would say that what could be done is, and this is certainly one of my proposals, because there are some real things that people can do if they care about this. There's a great organization that started just a few years ago called the Heterodox Academy. And if viewers want to look at it, it's heterodoxacademy.org. It's a bipartisan organization of 2,000 academics from around the country, all small schools, big schools, Ivy League, and they're all committed to supporting what's called viewpoint diversity in the classroom and in hiring. And what makes it, I think, so powerful is that progressive academics, along with conservatives, have said, this has gone on too long and too far. And when you get these bipartisan movements of thoughtful academics, I think you really can begin to see change. And when you begin to call for either it's to be more considerate in hiring, at least you're not dismissing conservative academics when you're hiring, or if they're coming up for tenure, there need to be at least some policies put in place to encourage the hiring and promotion of conservative academics.
All right. Well, in closing, because we're running just about out of time, if people want to learn more about you or Pepperdine, what's the best place for them to look?
So our website at the Graduate Policy School is publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. And if you go there and search for Viewpoint Diversity, or if you just search Viewpoint Diversity in Pepperdine in an internet search, you'll find our website.
Awesome to hear. I'm looking for the tolerance section of society, and maybe that's a place to start with it. Viewpoint Diversity, liking it. All right. Thanks, Pete. If you hold on for just a moment, we'll be back after a word from our underwriters, the Liberty Forum.
Some people think that a meeting of conservatives in Silicon Valley could fit in a small room. In fact, when the Conservative Forum was founded in 2003, we did meet in a small room, a coffee shop in San Jose. It doesn't get more grassroots than this. It may surprise you that there are thousands of people right here in Silicon Valley who share your principles of liberty, free markets, and limited government. Since our humble beginnings in that coffee shop, we've outgrown 3 meeting halls. From San Jose to Gilroy to Mill Valley, we bring hundreds of people together each month from all over the Bay Area to promote the principles of American liberty. How do we do it? It starts with a stellar lineup of speakers. Speakers like Steve Forbes, Senator Jim DeMint, Dr. Victor Davis Hanson, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, Andrew Breitbart, Pamela Geller, and many others. These speakers passionately articulate our shared principles and remind us why conservatism isn't just the smart choice, it's also the moral choice. Our monthly meetings are only one dimension of the forum. We underwrite The Right Side, a monthly television show on cable access channel KMVT. We also host a monthly Constitution discussion group and provide tables at our meetings for more than a dozen local groups who share our love of liberty to promote their specific cause. The Conservative Forum is the premier place in Silicon Valley for conservatives to gather, become invigorated, motivated, and empowered. We welcome guests to our monthly meetings and offer special discounted pricing to first-time visitors. Take a look at our speaker lineup in the coming months and join us to learn why we say liberty is made in America.
And that was a word from our underwriters, the Liberty Forum, formerly known as the Conservative Forum. They've made this show possible for previously 7 years, but now we've crossed the line, as we often do, into the 8th season. And so we thank them tremendously. But the reason that we had Pete in the studio this evening is that he'll be one of the speakers at the Liberty Forum at the IFES Portuguese Hall at 432 Stearland Road, just a few minutes from here in Mountain View. In February, Dennis Prager, nationally syndicated radio talk show host, will be on stage. And in March, Rob Long, award-winning Hollywood screenwriter and producer, most notably for the television series Cheers. In April, Father Robert Sirico, the founder of the Acton Institute for the Study of Religion and Liberty, will be on stage. If you want more information, you can look up Liberty Forum on Google or liberty-forum.us for more information. The presentations normally start around 7, and you can get more information there. But in closing, I think Pete makes an excellent point about needing to have more diversity of thought and opinion, and actually being willing to tolerate other viewpoints. And it has to start in places of education where there are differing opinions, or there should be, and where critical thought should be taught, but often the how to think versus what to think wins the day. So look up more about Pete, his history, and Pepperdine University when you get a chance, and I'm sure you'll be educated further. On that note, it's been great having you for all of this time, the now 8th season that you've been joining us. We appreciate that. I've been your host, Chris Pareja. This has been The Right Side, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the show or in person sometime soon. And if you just can't wait, reach out to us at therightsidetv@gmail.com. Have a great night.